What does AI mean for our future? Let's dive into it. Hey everyone, I'm Dolapo. I studied computer science at MIT, and then I had a wonderful opportunity to study artificial intelligence in grad school at Trinity College Dublin, and I'm now an AI product manager. Today I want to talk a little bit about how I think about AI and about how I'm thinking about the future of AI and the AI revolution that's bound to come. Let's get into it. So generally, when we talk about artificial intelligence, really what we mean as a global category are machines and computers that are trained to make decisions and to think and reason like humans. That's like the broad category. But within that, there are a bunch of other specific tools and techniques. So I think a more helpful approach might be to think of AI as this collection of tools or as this bag of tools. So that collection of tools includes things like supervised learning, which is a technique that allows us to really accurately label inputs. It's things like generative AI, which has been the newest buzz, which is all about large language models and algorithms that are able to create content which mimics human text and human speech. And then there's reinforcement learning and supervised learning, which are a little bit less structured, have less to do with labeled data, and are more to do with finding patterns in unlabeled data or making decisions in different environments based off of rewards and penalties. But for right now, really what we need to focus on is generative AI and supervised learning. I think first we'll talk about supervised learning. These are the two most important things to really understand the current landscape. So the first thing we can start off with is supervised learning. So let's talk, okay, what is supervised learning? So the general idea behind supervised learning is that an algorithm is able to learn from huge sweeps of labeled training data in order to correctly predict outcomes or to classify data to specific outcomes. And the general idea here is that we're taking specific inputs, passing them into the algorithm, and the algorithm or the model is able to then accurately define what is the specified outcome for that given input. So some use cases of this, probably the most obvious one is probably something like emails being inputs, and then the output can be like spam, whether or not this email was spam. Another use case is as an input, we might feed into the model an ad and a user's information, and then the output of that model might be whether or not the user is likely to click on that ad. Another use case might be if I am a business owner and I want to predict how many of my customers are likely to actually like churn or downsell or leave my platform in the coming year. So all these cases where we're taking in labeled data, we take in an input, and we're able to then map that input to a certain outcome and classify or predict. Okay. So the general process of supervised learning, and remember that it relies on this set of training data that we have that's labeled and that's clean, is that first we need to collect this data set. So the first step is collecting a huge training data set that then provides the opportunity for a model to learn from. The second step is actually training that data. And so that's the process of training the model to be able to pick up on these patterns and nuances and the complex functions that actually dictate to going from that input to the output. And the last part is just making that model available for use. So whether it's deploying it or just using it in your application. So now that we've trained the model is then using it on unseen data that the model hasn't seen before, basically. And so now the question is, why has supervised learning become so good in the last few decades? Like, why is it now that we've gotten so good at it? And to think about this, we really need to think about like the advancements in hardware. So the main thing to think about here is that in the last 10 to 15 years, we now have the hardware and the ability to train these models on large and vast sweeps of labeled training data. And so what this means is that we have so much training data that these models are then able to pick up on more complex and more nuanced functions and patterns in the data that we couldn't pick up on before simply because we did not have enough training data. And when I say like training data, I'm thinking of like hundreds and thousands and millions and millions and millions of data that these models are able to train on and to be fine-tuned in a way that allows them to really dial into the precise parameters that then map that input to a specific output. So the next thing to think about is, how did we get to the current landscape with generative AI? So generative AI, I mean, you're probably familiar with it, but that's things like ChatGPT, like Bing's assistant, like Bard, Claude from Amazon. And these are the large language models that are able to create content that really mimics and that sounds a lot like human text. Like when you go into the ChatGPT user interface and you type in a question like, I'm feeling hungry, can you recommend me some recipes? That sort of text. And the way we can understand how that works is that it's this idea of repeatedly applying supervised learning in order to predict the next word that comes after a user types in like a specific prompt. So, for example, you type in, I'm feeling hungry. The model is then going to repeatedly apply supervised learning to predict what is the next. Specifically, it's a token, but specifically, yeah, is the model is then going to predict what is the most likely word to come next. So if I typed in, I want to eat, the next thing might be fruit, or the next thing might be dessert, the next thing might be chocolate. And so it's repeatedly applying supervised learning in order to come up with a sentence that sounds and that really looks familiar to human text. And the way it's able to do that is because we have that large scale supervised learning training on these huge swaths and these huge amounts of text data, to where the models are able to pick up on these more nuanced and predict the most likely word to come next, essentially. Okay, so now that we've kind of looked a little bit about the current landscape and we understand, okay, like this is how we got here, this is what AI is. The next thing is to think about what are the current, what opportunities and what future is AI going to unlock for us? What are the future opportunities? So I think the first thing that I'd probably say is thinking about the lowered barrier of entry for development. So the idea here is that before this year, before generative AI, in order to develop a machine learning or AI-powered application, you might need a team of highly skilled engineers to come together, work for a few months, bang their heads, and then create this application that could be used for thousands of users at scale. That was the process before. It was the process of getting the training data, tuning the models, training the models, deploying it, maintaining it, all that configuration. And now, thanks to generative AI and thanks to how it's been able to lower the barrier of entry, is that same process, these same projects that would have taken people maybe like months to build in the past, can now be done in a day or in a week or in just a few days with someone who may not even have as much technical depth or technical knowledge as a fully fledged machine learning engineer, but simply because of how sophisticated these tools have become and in the ways that they become low code or no code, meaning requiring very minimal code. And specifically, generative AI is enabling a wide breadth and a wide cross-section of users to be able to take advantage of these tools, but also to be able to do so through prompting. And so that's taking human language as the input into the model, rather than necessarily having to code or having to use this like technical language in order to interact with the machines and those systems. And so what this means is that we're going to see opportunities arise in a huge portion of the economy outside of just consumer tech products or outside of just the tech industry. You can imagine before that if you are a leader at Facebook or at Google or at Amazon or any of these big tech companies, what are the things you're going to focus on? Well, you're going to focus on web search, you're going to focus on ads, and you're going to be applying machine learning tools and methodologies as much as possible into those specific categories that are going to generate you as much money as possible. And that's because, when you focus on ads and when you focus on web search, you can take advantage of the fact that you have billions and millions and, hundreds of millions of users, and you can reap as much financial value as you can out of those specific sectors in a way that makes sense and that is valuable and that makes sense for having a large team of highly skilled engineers. Whereas if you look at other market segments or, other economic opportunities like the supply chain or mom and pop restaurants, smaller restaurants or smaller businesses, all these sorts of businesses and entrepreneurial ventures that previously wouldn't have had as much access to deploying and using these artificial intelligence technologies. These people are the people that are now going to be able to take advantage of these tools, to take advantage of the low barrier of entry into using artificial intelligence. So what we're going to see is this huge proliferation or these huge opportunities coming about for a bunch of companies and entrepreneurs, but also just in general for people, non-technical people or not as technical background, to be able to still take advantage of the significant advancements that artificial intelligence, that generative AI, and that also that supervised learning afford the value that they bring in a way that in the past they weren't able to do. So I also just want to talk a little bit about some of the concerns that I have with the future of AI and with the direction that we're going into. And so I think the first thing, and most obviously, is what I touched on earlier, but that's about access, and that's about who actually has access to these technologies and how much wider we're going to make the inequality gap for people who could access ChatGPT and people who still don't even have like consistent and regular internet access. And so when we think about accessibility, when we say that everyone in 5 years is going to have an AI-powered assistant, what we really need to do is make sure that we're also looking at the distribution of these technologies and where they're concentrated and where they aren't concentrated, and really putting in as much effort as possible into ensuring that there's this smooth distribution of technology, or getting the places in the world that don't have internet, that don't have access to as much of these technological resources, up to speed as quickly as possible, applying AI on those complex problems so that the world inequality gap is able to be brought down. So I think the next thing I want to talk about is that the companies that are really at the breakthrough or are really at the cutting edge of these like AI technologies are really wielding a lot of power in terms of influence, in terms of being able to shape the future of the world. And I think we just generally need to be really careful about how we are concentrating, or about the fact that without any government intervention, without any, without the rise of, regulatory institutions, what we're going to find is that the power of AI is going to be harnessed, but also concentrated in the hands of a few tech elites that are able to wield it for whatever they choose, and that are going to be self-regulating without any external or government policy that's restricting the ways in which that they use these technologies. And so I think just a few hopes that I have for the future, for the direction, is I hope that with all this technological advancement that we're seeing, is that we're also able to make sure that we're investing in institutions that are going to be able to regulate these tech companies, that are going to be able to regulate the use of technology and of artificial intelligence in all the domains that it can be applied to. I hope that for every dollar that we invest into advancing artificial intelligence, that we're also able to invest a dollar into advancing how we think about it, how we think it can be used, how it can be used safely and securely, and used in a way that puts everyone in a better place than where we started, or than where they started, and in a way that is equitable and that is helping everyone access these tools rather than broadening and widening the inequality gap in the world. Overall, I think the landscape for artificial intelligence is literally changing every single day. It's exciting. I think it's extremely promising. I'm personally a believer that the direction that we're going in has the potential to really unlock so much, and the ability to apply AI systems to some of the world's most complex problems, like some of the more immediate threats to humanity, like climate change. I think the application of AI towards those problems is really promising and is really exciting. This was just a little recap of how I'm thinking about AI and what I think the future landscape is going to look like. And thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed that video, you can check out another one over here. And yeah, see you on the flip side. Take care.